that take place with firearms in all categories. Alcohol is a component, but we know that because of the amount of restriction on research for the CDC and the ATF and other groups, but that will become apparent as that research becomes available. So when I go back to the drunk driving thing, that may be an appropriate barrier to possession or to purchasing rights within a certain window of time, or to more scrutiny of your purchase. And then you have the whole suicide issues and the economics and various things. A lot of that can be addressed, it seems to me, and what I want to get across to the pro side of the discussion is most of what needs to take place has nothing to do physically with firearms that happen to be in your house, other than the responsibilities as a responsible owner to properly secure them, except for the weapon that you're using for self-defense, where you feel you need to use it, and having a reasonable understanding of just how great that risk of needing it as for self-defense is. If you live on the south side of Chicago, in some of the terrible neighborhoods in Chicago, then by all means, like the one fellow I've debated here, you may need 3 guns in the room with you, right? I lived in Chicago. I lived in the south side. Pardon?
You may need it, but you can't legally have it there.
Well, you may or may not. I don't know. I mean, you certainly didn't legally buy it in Chicago.
It's almost impossible to get a firearm in Chicago.
Well, yeah, no. Chicago's got very strict. You can buy it and bring it into the city, but you. I'm sorry, sir.
It's almost as bad as New York. Actually,
yeah, well,
New York is almost as bad.
Yeah. Now, are you in New York, Brad? Is that where you're located?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
We have stupid gun laws.
Yes and no. Yes and no. Yes, John.
Okay, we have another very serious problem when it comes to firearms. Now, I know a lot of people sit there and say we need laws on the books that if a firearm is stolen from your home, you have to report it to the police. I have actually had this happen. They came in, took one of my sawzalls, cut the safe open, and stole the guns. I come home, found it. First thing I did, called the cops. Gave them serial numbers, everything. The only thing I didn't have were pictures of me holding the firearms or just pictures of firearms. Okay, we even went down and said we suspect this is the guy that did it. That was 4 years ago. Do you know how much they've done to find these firearms? They put them on a hot sheet so that if they were used in the commission of a crime, the state police would not come arrest me. 4 years has passed. They have never recovered the guns, and they just don't know what happened. Yeah, they've made no effort to retrieve these firearms.
We had to strip the thing apart. Because you cannot leave a rifle with the bolt in it someplace. If your rifle gets stolen, if you walk back to base, you had your rifle stolen, you had your bolt in your hand, you weren't going to get in that much trouble. You can get a slap on the wrist, like what happened. But you came out, you went back, and you had the whole thing stolen. You were going to jail for that.
To go looking again at Sandy Hook, why? I mean, I understand why you might have a pistol under the pillow or a weapon at easy reach within the closet. And of course, we don't know, and it'll be a long time before anybody tells us whether all the weapons that were used in Sandy Hook were disassembled in a storage locker and parts in different places, and the kid happened to know where everything was, or whether it was all just sitting there on the living room table. But it certainly, from a public safety perspective, makes perfectly good sense to me that you would have weapons that are in the house for purposes other than the self-defense of the house. And we're not talking about having an armory room for the paranoid that believe the government are coming, but the general belief that one or two weapons are in the house that exist for the purpose of defense of the house. Those are going to be loaded. They're going to be located. One would like to think that the responsible owner would not have it within reach of their 4-year-olds, which unfortunately we're seeing several examples that that's not the case. But you'd have it in places where you could get it when you needed it, in an environment where you would be able to have your last stand comfortably, and so on and so forth. But I'm a firm believer in the idea of, if you've got 10 guns in the house, you only need 1 or 2. The other 8 should be disassembled, and parts and pieces should be in such a way that it makes it very difficult for someone in a timely fashion to put it all together. So I would be a proponent of some laws along those lines, or some activity along those lines.
There's only one mild little problem with that. The enforceability of that.
Oh, at the end of the day, that's one of the arguments that goes against any of the suggestions on how to do any of this is, well, enforcement. There are a lot of people that blow it off, but I come at it from the perspective of, I'm now living in Canada. I've lived in Canada for quite a long time. That I still am an American citizen. I still vote in elections. I still have an interest in what's going on. I live here because of my work, not for any other reason. And I look at it and I go, in Canada they have, with divorce, they have maintenance enforcement. If the courts have assigned a child payment that you are required to make, if you don't make that, within 2 months of your not making that on a monthly basis, you are brought before what's called maintenance enforcement, and you no longer make the payment to your spouse or ex-spouse. You make it to the government, and you actually have to go and physically present. It's all designed to be incredibly inconvenient, and they have access to your driver's license and all of these other things, and you actually have to go and talk to a person through glass this thick, and they have the whole, that you speak to them in such a way that you have to bend over into a submissive position to speak to them. It's very demeaning across the board. You're sitting in an environment where a dozen other people can hear anything you say. But the reality of it is that once you're in that system, for example, going back to background checks, that strikes me as one of the other areas where you might have some impact on enforcement and behavior. It's all behavior related, right? And so, do you pay your child support because you're afraid of standing there with your jeans hanging down around your ankles while you're trying to talk to somebody through an inch thick bulletproof glass? Or do you pay your maintenance enforcement because you recognize that you have an obligation to your children? Same thing. You have an obligation to your children. Do you take your weapons apart in the house, or do you not? Excuse me.
If your weapons are you should be properly stored. I believe the NRA is actually very big educating people on how to properly store things. But the problem comes that the government stepping in and saying, you have to do X, Y, and Z with your property. It'd be like the government coming in and saying, well, if you're not using your car, you need to put, and for more than 2 weeks, you have to put it on blocks and take the wheels off. They don't feel it.
And I appreciate the point, but I think that there's a fair misrepresentation. But I think there's a fair misrepresentation. I mean, I think if you there's a whole segment of society that believes that whatever government says needs to take place, that the government is somehow going to become this headed monster that's going to attack your rights. The fact is, we all are faced with, I mean, in our conversation here, we all are faced with speeding laws and stop signs and various different things and regulations, dog licenses, cat licenses, a variety of government-related interference if you run a business, reporting requirements with respect to your income and various different things. And you're either a part of society and you're participating in it, doing whatever, or you're not. And to blame the failure of a particular legislation or to object to a particular legislation on the basis that it's somehow going to interfere with your ability to function as a free person and therefore is a great infringement. I mean, it's an inconvenience. It's filing XYZ paperwork can be very frustrating if you're a business, but it's part of doing business. It's an expensive business. Get over it, get on with life. It's not a legitimate. I think if you come at it and say, okay, my 85-year-old grandmother can fire an AR-15 because the recoil, and therefore that is something that needs to be looked at if we are going to look at restricting those weapons. Is there something that would provide her with the same level of security that she can manage or not? And is the image of an 85-year-old woman holding an AR-15 more frightening than an 85-year-old woman holding any other firearm pointed at a threat and various other things? Those are legitimate topics of discussion. That the requirement to have, if you have 6 AR-15s and 5 of them are taken apart, that's not so much of a real argument. John, you have something to pipe in?
Yeah, I do. I see what he's saying about. Yeah, I can see where his mother can handle an AR-15. But the fact of the matter is, there are more appropriate weapons for self-defense than an AR-15 in that regard. Mm-hmm. Now, on the farm, yeah, I would have loved to have an AR-15 because, as I told you, I could shoot a dog, put it down humanely, but I didn't have to necessarily worry about shooting something behind the dog. My mother could do it with a 22 long. Now, my mother could do it with a 22 long rifle. But if I had to choose between an AR-15 to protect myself and my home and a good shotgun, I would take the shotgun every time.
And a 410 shotgun does just as much damage at close range as an AR-15 does. I'm going to show you down.
Brad, is it you?
People, the point John made is right. A shotgun would be better than an AR-15. However, someone that's trained for urban warfare with an M4, F-15 when they're in the military, they're better off having an M4 than, or sorry, an AR-15 than a shotgun.
So my understanding of what you're saying, Brad, is that I mean, among other things, you've also had more hours of training with that particular style of weaponry or firearm. And that brings us to a different junction. I mean, there's.
And again, I think that makes a big difference. I also think part of one of those things that I think should be one of those force. If you're going to own a firearm, in order to maintain your permit to have a firearm, you have to go to twice a year. Minimum 50 police officers have to do it. I think that's ridiculously low. That's good going. Will get qualified on it frequently. Like let's say, once every 3 months, you have to go and shoot the rifle.
I think I go back to the belief that the 99.9% of the people that currently own firearms that are engaged in one level or another of this debate are law-abiding individuals and are entitled to due respect and the rest of it, and at the same time have a responsibility in much the same way if I want to pilot an airplane, to demonstrating a capacity to be able to do so. And so I'm not in disagreement with, I don't know that it needs to be onerous in terms of every so many months, but perhaps that's a way of catching a few people in the net when we go back to the mental health issues. And I like the discussion that was going in front of the Senate from one of the doctors, just simply saying, give us the authority to ask our patients about firearms in the same way we ask about cigarettes and fatty foods. And certainly there should be no restrictions on physicians having those conversations and say, for example, talking to expectant fathers, do you have firearms in the home? Are you aware that your children are now at a much greater risk? Are your firearms out of their reach? I mean, you and I recognize that as common sense.
The doctor ever asked me if I owned a firearm, I would look at the doctor and say, it's none of your business.
And that's, presently, that you're entitled to say at the present if the doctor asks you the question. The fact is that the doctor is currently restricted from asking that question. He can ask you about your sex life, he can ask you about your smoking, your eating habits, but there are laws that restrict him from asking about firearms. And one of the steps forward that certainly my side of the argument is looking at is taking that restriction away. You, as a citizen who owns a firearm, are entitled to say whatever you choose in answer to that question. But that the doctor, as a public health representative, has, for the purpose of data collection on their part, but also for the purpose of identifying risks for you, health risks, and for your family, they ought to be able to ask in much the same way that they might ask you if you're involved at all with prostitution. It's a health risk.
I don't think those are comparable.
Well, now one thing,
John, are you